In August 2016, specifically on August 19th, 2016, the chairman of the Donald Trump for President campaign resigned. Now, looking back on that moment now, it is important and strange for a whole bunch of different reasons. I mean, at the time, it was remarkable that the campaign chairman of a major party nominee for president was resigning from the campaign under a cloud of allegations that he had received millions of dollars in off-the-books payments from a pro-Russian political party operating in the former Soviet Union, right? Like that, in the history of American presidential politics, that was kind of a moment in itself. In terms of the immediate electoral politics of it all, that August 19th departure of Paul Manafort was also remarkable because, you know, after that candidate had just received his party's nomination just 2.5 months before the general election, that's the Republican Party's nominee for president losing yet another campaign chairman, having to get a third campaign chairman, right? That moment in time, August 19th, 2016, it also ended up being a historical turning point because the new campaign chair who came on to replace Paul Manafort was the publisher of a fairly obscure, super hardline right-wing website that was very controversially associated with the white nationalist movement in this country. It was also oddly associated with over-the-top passionate support for Britain leaving the European Union. The Brexit campaign and the Trump campaign would, of course, both later come under scrutiny for having been illegally assisted by the Russian government. But at the time, that was only one of a million bizarre storylines in the presidential election of 2016. And now looking back at that date, looking back at August 19th, 2016, the day Paul Manafort left the Trump campaign, we can also see one other very, very specific reason why that date, that occasion of Manafort leaving the campaign was so important and ultimately so weird. Because on that date, that exact day when Paul Manafort quit running the presidential campaign of Donald Trump, he also somehow found time that same day to set up a new LLC called Summer Breeze. Huh? I mean, you might think he'd be busy that day, being ousted from running the Republican Party's presidential campaign just weeks before the election. But nope, that day he found time to set up this little holding company. And I don't know why he set up that holding company on the exact day he left the Trump campaign, but it later turned out to be a very handy little holding company. In December 2016, so after the election, during the presidential transition, that company, Summer Breeze, which Manafort had set up on the day he quit the campaign, that company received a $9.5 million loan from a little tiny bank in Chicago that supposedly specialized in loaning to U.S. veterans. Paul Manafort is not a veteran. Not only did he get that $9.5 million loan from that Chicago bank in December 2016, the following month, in January 2017, he got 2 more multi-million-dollar loans from that same bank, for a total of about $16 million in cash from this one bank that, again, specializes in lending to veterans. Now, the Wall Street Journal was first to report on these odd transactions between Manafort and this little Chicago bank, including the fact that the holding company was set up literally on the day that Manafort left the Trump campaign. The Journal was also first to report that these loans to Paul Manafort were hugely outsized compared to the resources of that little bank. That's $16 million that the bank handed over to Paul Manafort over just a few weeks between December 2016 and January 2017. Those loans represented nearly a quarter of all the loanable assets for that little bank. Well, in February 2018, NBC News reported that Robert Mueller's office, special counsel's office, was looking into those loans to Paul Manafort during the transition. And somewhat ominously for Paul Manafort and for that little bank, NBC reported in February that, quote, the 3 loans to Manafort were questioned by other officials at the bank. One source told NBC News that at least one of the bank employees who felt pressured into approving the Manafort deals is now cooperating with investigators. Eek. That same day, the Wall Street Journal reported that the bank's decision to give all that cash to Paul Manafort during the presidential transition, it might have been part of an almost too ridiculous to be believed quid pro quo. Quote, around the time his bank made the Manafort loans in late 2016 and early 2017, Steve Kalk, the chief executive of this Chicago bank, was seeking to become Secretary of the Army Now, like the U.S. Army, secretary doesn't always mean highest job in the company, right? But in this case, being secretary of the Army means this guy from this little Chicago bank who's given all this money to Paul Manafort, he thought he was going to run the U.S. Army. Quote, Mr. Kalk was placing calls to the Pentagon and specifically to Army headquarters, asking for briefings to obtain information and prepare himself for a possible job, according to a person familiar with the inquiries. Mr. Kalk's overtures raised questions among military leaders as to how to respond. The Wall Street Journal was first on this story out of the gate. They had the initial reports on something unusual having happened between the Trump campaign chairman, who resigned under this weird cloud related to Russia, and then this little bank in Chicago. They had those first reports in the spring of 2017, not long after the inauguration. And the Journal, of course, stayed on the story ever since. Even still, though, even as we have seen this story slowly simmer and then start to steam and boil over the course of more than a year now, it is still rather astonishing that somehow the president's campaign chair duped this guy in Chicago not only into giving him $16 million, but he apparently duped him into doing that after the Trump campaign chair had already been kicked off the Trump campaign for being too obvious a Russian stooge. I mean, months after that, he convinces this guy to give him $16 million and persuades the guy that that will result in him becoming Secretary of the Army. I mean, this guy not only was allegedly trying to get this quid pro quo, he thought that he got it. I mean, he's like 1-800-GO-ARMY. Hey, this is Steve. I'm the new guy in charge of the Army, they told me. Can I speak to my office, please? I need my briefing materials. What? This is months after Manafort had to resign in disgrace, right? We haven't seen that bank CEO, this guy Steve Kalk, since these allegations first surfaced. Now, as far as we know, no charges were ever brought against him in conjunction with this allegation. But this allegation is no longer just in the papers. It has made its way into the federal criminal case against Paul Manafort. This is from a filing in the case against Manafort just from earlier this month. Quote, counts 29 through 32 of the superseding indictment charged the defendant with bank fraud and conspiring to commit bank fraud against a financial institution, Lender D, in seeking and securing two loans totaling approximately $16 million. Now, the financial institution in this filing, they call it Lender D. We have every reason to believe that Lender D in this case is Steve Kalk's bank, the Federal Savings Bank in Chicago. It's a big-sounding name, but it's a tiny little institution. Quote, between April 2016, so during the campaign, and January 2017, the month of the inauguration, the defendant, Paul Manafort, made and conspired to make false and fraudulent representations to the Federal Savings Bank of Chicago to secure these loans. Both loan applications ultimately were approved by, among others, a senior executive at the Federal Savings Bank who sought the defendant's assistance to obtain a position advising the Trump campaign, which he obtained, and later in the administration of President Trump, which he did not obtain. So from reporting at NBC News and the Wall Street Journal and other places, we believe that this bank executive from this little bank in Chicago, we believe he did get a position on an economic advisory council that was supposedly advising Trump. But if these public reports are true, he was also apparently persuaded by Paul Manafort that he was going to get the Army, too. He'd be put in charge of the Army. But he never did actually obtain that job. In the list of evidence that the special counsel's office has filed with the court showing what evidence they're going to cite in their case against Paul Manafort, there's a number of emails that reference this bank CEO, Steve Kalk, including one with the now very sad in retrospect subject line, quote, need Steve Kalk resume. Oh, do ya? So he can go run the Army? And look at this one, August 4th, 2016, 2 weeks before Manafort gets kicked off the Trump campaign. Quote, email Paul Manafort to Steve Kalk, Steve Kalk professional bio. Right at that point, Paul Manafort's probably already calling him Mr. Secretary. Well, now today in court, the judge in the Manafort case started to show us some of the substance behind these allegations that thus far have mostly been spelled out in the press. First of all, the judge unsealed the fact that not just one, but two employees of this little bank in Chicago have been granted immunity in exchange for their testimony as witnesses for the prosecution. We knew heading into today that there were 5 witnesses who were all basically pleading the fifth. They were all saying they wouldn't testify to avoid incriminating themselves. Prosecutors got permission from a very senior official at the criminal division at the Justice Department to grant those 5 witnesses limited immunity, what's called use immunity, so their testimony can be compelled. They can be forced to testify, and their testimony can't be used against them as long as they don't lie in court. Well, the judge today accepted all of those immunity deals for all 5 of those witnesses, but then, surprise, the judge also decided in court today, in a sort of a, it was one of those sessions, you've seen this like in courtroom dramas on TV where the judge asks the counsel to approach the bench and the people in the courtroom can't hear what's going on and it all just happens right there at the judge's bench. That's how they had this discussion today. And in that discussion, which again, people in the courtroom couldn't hear, but we just got the transcript of it, the judge explains that, yeah, he's going to grant immunity to these 5 witnesses, but surprise, he's also going to reveal their identities. The prosecution wanted all their names kept secret unless and until they actually ended up testifying. The judge today said, no, I'm telling everybody who they are. That is not something that we knew would happen today. People who actually watched the hearing in person in court today didn't hear this happen, but we now know from the transcript that we just got a few minutes ago that this is how that went down. Quote, the judge, I received a number of motions that were under seal, requested to be under seal for these witnesses. Why do they need to be under seal? These are witnesses, as I understand it, who've been granted immunity by the government and yet are reluctant to testify or don't want to testify. And therefore, you're asking the court to issue an order because you've granted them immunity, use immunity, presumably, on their testimony. They still don't want to testify and you want an order. Now, why in the world should all of that be under seal and ex parte? Mr. Assange, prosecutor from the special counsel's office. No, we have told them that immunity from the court, which I understand the court must grant under statute. The reason it's under seal, these individuals, their involvement in this case have not been made public. And the department has a policy for uncharged individuals to not name them unless we have, and the judge intervenes and says, I don't have that policy and it's going to be public. Once we're here, everything ought to be in open court. Prosecutor, Mr. Assange, says, Your Honor, can I make one other point? The judge says yes. Mr. Assange says, some of these witnesses we've prepared out of the abundance of caution. We're prepared to call these witnesses, but there's a chance, depending on how the evidence comes in, that we will not call them. And so again, unsealing these records for a witness who's essentially admitting at some level criminal exposure, and then we don't call them as a witness, we're just trying to be thoughtful. The judge, if I do it here in court, I issue an order, it's going to be public. Prosecutor, oh, no question, Your Honor. The judge, I don't care whether they testify or not. I understand your reasons for wanting to be under seal, but I think it's appropriate to identify. So that's all happening at the bench, the judge and the lawyers, and they're talking about whether or not these witnesses are going to have their names made public. The prosecutors were like, we don't think that's necessary. Their names haven't been associated with this case before. The judge is like, I'm making them public. And he did. So these are the 5 people whose immunity deals were unsealed by the judge in the Manafort case today. Now, these are not household names. These appear to all be people who worked in banks or financial services of some kind related to Manafort. These 2 here are apparently current or former employees of an accounting firm called KWC, which was Manafort's accounting firm. This person here appears to be related to an insurance firm. The evidence list suggests that insurance firm was involved in Manafort getting some of these big bank loans that he got over the past few years. But then these two guys are current or former employees of that little bank in Chicago, Federal Savings Bank in Chicago. If all the public reporting about Manafort and his interactions with that bank and him possibly offering to sell a fake job in the Trump administration to that bank president in exchange for $16 million. I mean, if that public reporting is even close to accurate, that's a very bad sign for Mr. Manafort that there are 2 employees from that bank who have been granted immunity in order to testify for prosecutors in their case against Paul Manafort. But that is just one way in which things have continued to go very badly for Mr. Manafort in court. I mean, he sat there today in court in a rumpled, short-sleeve, dark green prison jumpsuit. He was not called upon to say anything in today's proceedings, and he didn't say anything, but you can't imagine that he is happy with how things are going. Mr. Manafort continues to lose either in whole or in part every single substantive motion related to his case. Today, for example, his lawyers had tried to exclude from consideration in his trial the nature of the work that Manafort did in Ukraine when he worked for that pro-Putin, pro-Russian Ukrainian strongman president who was ousted in a popular uprising in 2014. Manafort's lawyers had said that information about who exactly his big client was in Ukraine, that would be prejudicial information to the jury. It would turn the jury against him. It was unnecessary in order to prove or disprove the specific charges that Manafort is facing in Virginia. Well, the judge considered that argument today at length. There was a lot of back and forth about that today in the hearing, but the judge said no. Prosecutors said, listen, the jurors need to know where Paul Manafort made all his money and why he suddenly might have been in need of a new source of funds after his big money client got thrown out of office and went back to Moscow to live in exile. The jurors are going to have to know about how he made his money and what happened to that big spigot of money that he was latched onto until 2014. That's what prosecutors said. And then here's how that played out today in court with the judge. The judge says, quote, "You're seeking to preclude the government from offering evidence about the nature of the work Mr. Manafort did for the Ukrainian government or the Ukrainian president. Is that right?" Manafort's defense counsel, "That's correct, Your Honor." The judge, "And why wouldn't that be relevant? And why wouldn't that be relevant?" Then the judge decides that the prosecutors have won that argument. So the jury is going to get to hear how Paul Manafort made his money and who he worked for. Now, Paul Manafort's lawyers today also tried to exclude from his trial any reference to Manafort's time as chairman of the Trump for President campaign. The judge in today's hearing also rejected that from Manafort's lawyers, basically saying, well, you know, there is this allegation about Manafort getting $16 million from this little Chicago bank in exchange for him allegedly promising this guy that he could run the army. Right? The judge today ruled, yeah, you know, whatever else we decide about this information about you running the Trump campaign, that stuff has to stay in. Quoting from today's transcript, the judge says, quote, "The defendant seeks to preclude argument concerning any alleged collusion with the Russian government and defendant's affiliation with the Trump campaign." The prosecutor says, "As to point one, what we said is we don't intend to admit any evidence about Russia collusion. But we said that as to Mr. Manafort's involvement in the Trump campaign, that a very small portion of the trial deals with his bank fraud relating to a particular bank. And in that instance, Mr. Manafort's role in the Trump campaign is relevant because one of the motivations of the chairman of the bank to extend the loan, notwithstanding the fraud, was that the chairman sought and obtained a position in the Trump campaign for Mr. Manafort and then sought but did not ultimately obtain a position in the Trump administration." And the judge says, "Did this person know that the information submitted was not accurate?" The prosecutor says, "Yes, he did." The judge says, "Doesn't that present you with a problem of fraud since he knew, meaning he was in on it?" The prosecutor says, "It doesn't present us with a problem because the fraud was on the bank and not just the individual judge." And the judge says, "All right." The prosecutor says Mr. Manafort's involvement in the Trump campaign was prevalent throughout, so we'll try to do it in a discreet way, but it's hard to take out those facts, if not impossible. And the judge says with respect to the affiliation with the Trump campaign, that motion would be denied in part and granted in part. It's denied as to what you just referred to. That is the bank loan with respect to the banker who went along with the fraud so that he could get a job. The judge is ruling that that part of Manafort working for the Trump campaign, that's going to be in the trial. Paul Manafort also today asked for a long delay in this trial, this felony trial in Virginia. Specifically, he asked for this trial to be delayed until after his other felony trial in Washington, D.C. this September. Now, one reason he's asking for that delay is that he says he only got access to his own bookkeeping records just recently. Manafort's lawyers made the case in court today that he needs more time to go through his own bookkeeping records. The judge in this hearing today did not seem impressed with this line of argument. The judge, "Mr. Downing, you're telling me you didn't have any access to your own bookkeeping records?" Mr. Downing, "Correct, Your Honor." The judge, "Really?" Mr. Downing, "Yes." The judge, "It's your own bookkeeper." Mr. Downing, "It's your own bookkeeper until your bookkeeper gets a subpoena from the United States government and demands," and the judge says, "Until what?" And Mr. Downing, Manafort's defense lawyer, says the bookkeeper got the subpoena from the U.S. government, at which point in time the bookkeeper was demanding that we reimburse the bookkeeper for the subpoena production. We didn't do that, and they refused to turn the records over to us, so. The judge says, "And what steps did you take?" The lawyer says, we had communications with the bookkeeper on more than one occasion to get the files back. And the judge says, well, go to court and get the documents. They belong to your client. Manafort's lawyer says, well, we thought we'd get them in discovery, Your Honor. It's a lot cheaper. The judge says, no. It depends on how you calculate the expense, other than dollars and cents. So the judge today considered that request from Paul Manafort to delay his trial, in part because he hasn't reviewed his own bookkeeping records. Why has he not reviewed his own bookkeeping records? Because his bookkeeper wants to charge him some money to get them back to look at them. That's the way evidence unfolds in a case like this. If the government is going to use the evidence, the government has to show you what they're going to use. And so they need to provide copies of what they're going to use to the defense. Paul Manafort decided that rather than pay his bookkeeper to get his own records back, he'd just wait till the prosecutors looked at that stuff, and then he'd get a copy of it later on from the prosecutors. And that has created this big delay. And so now he wants to delay his whole trial till November because he's that cheap about his own records. So the judge is like, really? Are you sure? Just because it was too expensive, are you sure? The judge ruled on that today, said, yes, Paul Manafort, you can have your delay in this trial. You want a 4-month delay until November? You can have a delay. You want 4 months? You can have 6 days. I'll see you Tuesday next week. The judge says, quote, I have before me a motion for continuance. There are equities and good reasons on both sides of this motion. In the end, what I've decided to do is I've decided to postpone the commencement of this case until the 31st of July. In other words, it gives you approximately another week, and then we're going ahead. We'll start tomorrow with the juror questionnaires. Quote, you will simply have to work hard to complete your review. So jurors will start turning up in the courthouse in Virginia tomorrow. A whole pool of potential jurors will be on site tomorrow. The judge says he'll pick the 12 jurors and 4 alternates. That means the trial is on. The campaign chairman of the sitting president of the United States is now officially going on trial.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.